So we are still awaiting that potential Iranian response to the Israeli provocation. Of course, they assassinated top Hamas leader on Iranian soil the day before Iranian's president inauguration. And there's a lot to sort through here. So I brought in an expert to help us understand what is happening with regards to Iran, also what is happening domestically with regards to Israel, also what is happening with regards to Kamala Harris and how she may approach this conflict. Omar Baddar, Palestinian-American political analyst and great friend of the show. Great to see you, sir.
Absolutely. Great to be with you, Krystal.
Yeah, so let's start with this. The U.S. military rushing all kinds of assets into the region in anticipation of this Iranian response. In fact, yesterday, everybody was on pins and needles thinking that the response was incredibly imminent. You had a lot of American soldiers who were deeply concerned about potential attacks on American military bases in the region. Let's take a listen to this Fox News clip setting up what assets are moving into that area.
Right now, Israel putting their military on high alert once again, as Israeli intelligence is picking up signals that Iran and one of their terror proxies, Hezbollah, are now poised to attack at any moment, really. The Pentagon is now racing to send more firepower to the Middle East to defend Israel and our assets and bases in the region. So they have sent a submarine that is loaded with a reported 150 cruise missiles, as well as speeding up now the arrival of the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, which is now in near China, but is heading quickly to the region. And that adds to the wide range of American force that is already there.
In addition, let's go ahead and put D2 up on the screen. The White House is saying that they agree with the Israeli intelligence that it is increasingly likely Iran will attack Israel this week. Put the next one up on the screen. We also have indications Iran has taken, quote, significant preparatory steps in its missile and drone units, similar to those that had taken before the attack on Israel in April. Israeli and U.S. officials tell Barak Ravi. They stress, however, that Israel and the U.S. do not know the exact timing of the attack. So, Omar, if you could just react to sort of where we are and what is expected at this point.
Sure. And honestly, just a part of what you said in the setup, I think is really important to emphasize, which is that this all started with that assassination in the Iranian capital. And you can imagine if another country had set off a bomb in Washington, D.C., what the American reaction would be. We would instantly be bombing whatever country is responsible. And the same for any European capital. The same for Israel also. You constantly have the U.S. officials saying things like, well, Israel has to respond to this. There's no way they can let something like that go. And here you have a situation in which the Iranian capital is hit and the Lebanese capital is hit by a missile. And rather than a super targeted assassination that takes somebody out in a car or in a military base, they bombed a civilian building in Beirut and they killed multiple women and children in the process. And yet you have everybody right now talking about, and you saw it in a statement that Biden also put out with some European allies, talking about the need to defend Israel from Iranian aggression. I mean, the entire thing is backwards, and it's insulting to the intelligence of anybody who's actually paying attention. So what the U.S. position right now, what they are defending, is a situation in which there is different rules for different people. We say if this were to happen to us, we have to respond. If it happens to Israel, Israel has to respond. But when it happens to Iran or to Lebanon, then you need to take it. And if you do react to that, then that's an act of aggression that we have to stand up against. And that really is such a microcosm of American policy in the region at large, of the fact that we don't value life equally. We don't value sovereignty equally.
That's right.
We constantly treat Israel like a country that is above the rules and above the law. And that is why we have this conflict that we're in. You can diffuse all of it simply by insisting that Israel behave within the bounds of international law, respect human rights, and in this case, end the genocide in Gaza. The solution is so simple that you simply need a ceasefire for this onslaught that has lasted for nearly a year. And yet instead, we're seeing this rush towards further militarism and confrontation, all in defense of an order in which we and our friends get to do whatever the hell we want to, and nobody else gets to object to it.
And I think it's important to remember too, we have a number of soldiers who are stationed in the region who are very much put at risk by these provocations. And yes, last time around, the U.S. rushed to Israel's rescue and was able to repel. And I think it seems there was some back channel coordination even with the Iranians to make sure that that would be the end result. Yeah. There's no guarantees of that this time around. And so not only is it obviously grave danger for our soldiers stationed in the region, but grave danger for the potential escalation that we could see after this. I mean, let's be clear, this has never been a conflict that has stayed within the borders of Gaza and Israel. However, you could have a much bigger and much even more deadly and destructive war than what we've already seen.
It's honestly difficult to put into words how significant it would be. I think Americans have a memory of what a war in Afghanistan looked like, what a war in Iraq looked like, and frankly, a full-scale war with Iran would be fundamentally different. It is far more destructive and devastating than anything that we've seen, simply because Iran and its allies in the region have such a massive capacity for launching rockets that can target just about any spot in the region. You can think of any part of Israel, all American military bases in the region, the major cities of other countries that are allied with the US. If this thing blows up, it could lead to the deaths of millions of people, literally, not figuratively. It's a very, very dire situation. And it's kind of crazy because neither the US nor Iran want this war. They've made it clear that they don't want it. You saw it in the communication behind the scenes about it. And yet we're put in a situation right now where Iran, feeling compelled to respond to a major assassination in their capital city, is pushing us to a potential confrontation between the US and Iran. And it's utterly insane that you allow Israel that much leverage over American politics and policy to the point to where we're willing to go to a war that we don't want to go to against a country that doesn't want war in defense of a regime that is currently committing genocide in Gaza and engaging in these propagations to spread that war. And it's worth noting what Netanyahu's thinking in all of this. He is stuck between a rock and a hard place. There is no political way out of the situation that he found himself in. The genocide has been going on for over 10 months, killed countless people in Gaza, tens of thousands, and those are the low estimates. The official estimates are almost certainly an undercount. He hasn't defeated Hamas militarily, has not been able to retrieve the hostages militarily, and the only way out of this is basically a ceasefire, but a ceasefire also means the end of Bibi Netanyahu's career and his entire legacy as the person on whose watch everything fell apart. This promise of Israeli security did not, he knows that this is the end for him, and he is willing to provoke a regional war in order for him to find a political way out of it, because ultimately for Netanyahu, the only victory there is to successfully complete the genocide in Gaza. And with the Biden administration, that means endless time. He wants to be able to drag this out for as long as possible. Or if he gets a Trump administration in, then they might have a complete loosening of the reins and for them to simply go berserk and actually start massacring people at far, far greater numbers, which is kind of crazy to think because what's already happening is a horror beyond imagination.
And likely accelerate the annexation of the West Bank as well, which is something that Miriam Edelson, who is a huge donor to Trump, has said that she, that's basically what she's asking for in exchange for her campaign cash.
And Israeli policy they have not been squeamish about being open about that at this point. You have the entire Knesset voting in opposition to a two-state solution or a Palestinian state, even in the future. And a situation, frankly, right now, where they're running literal rape camps and torture camps for Palestinians. And when news of that breaks and gets out, the reaction is not to deny or be embarrassed, but to basically flaunt it and be proud of it. You have massive riots in defense of the rapists taking place in Israel, and members of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, also saying openly that they defend this kind of policy. And, they're basically on track to let these people off either on no charges at all or on extremely light charges, simply because they have that little value for Palestinian life. And that's the regime that we're going to bat for. It's just utterly insane. It makes absolutely no sense.
So yesterday, you brought up the ceasefire talks, which are ongoing and I think pretty hopeless at this point. I mean, for one thing, Israel assassinated the top Hamas negotiator, who, in the context of Hamas, was more interested in those peace talks. And now you have Yahya Sinwar, who was the direct, negotiator, the top communicator in terms of those talks. We got one of these reports yesterday that we've gotten a million times of, Biden's really frustrated with Bibi this time, and there's really tough conversations happening behind the scenes. And this time, allegedly, the Americans were going to indicate that it's not only Hamas that's the problem in the ceasefire talks. They're going to admit that Bibi Netanyahu is a problem in the ceasefire talks. And lo and behold, this morning in the New York Times, we get this report that I'm sure was, an intentional administration leak. The headline here is Israel was less flexible in recent Gaza ceasefire talks, documents show, basically indicating that Israel came in and after they offered a proposal that Hamas, by and large, basically accepted, then Bibi came in and added all these additional demands that his own negotiators knew were effectively poison pills to try to kill these talks. This is no surprise to you and me. Is it actually a surprise to them? Like, are they that dumb? That they really didn't see these dynamics which have been in place the entire time?
This, honestly, for people who have been paying attention, that has also been obvious for a very, very long time. That Hamas has made clear early on that they're willing to give up all the hostages in exchange for a ceasefire. And Netanyahu kept looking for reasons to put up obstacles. And the big sticking point for many months was that Hamas wanted a permanent ceasefire and Netanyahu wanted only a temporary ceasefire where Hamas releases all the hostages and then he goes back to finishing genocide in Gaza. That was a non-starter position. And insanely enough, Hamas was finally under enough pressure to actually agree to it. The idea of simply a temporary ceasefire with a possibility of it extending, and Netanyahu still found a reason to say no to that. So I believe that Biden is deeply frustrated with the fact that he does want a ceasefire. But the question is, are you willing to use the leverage that the United States has, the only leverage with somebody as recalcitrant and rejectionist as Netanyahu? None of this is going to matter unless you cut off the weapons supply. What obviously needs to happen right now is for the United States to make clear that the U.S. is not going to send another penny or another bomb or another bullet to the Israeli military until Israel ends that genocide or takes very meaningful steps indicating that they're moving in that direction, which right now there has been none of. So that's the contrast, is that you have a U.S. administration that is willing to share its frustration more publicly now because they are feeling under pressure and they do see what Netanyahu's plot is and where this is heading. And yet they're not willing to use meaningful leverage. I don't think Netanyahu gives a crap whether Biden leaks to the press. Is
unhappy, leaks this or that, or no.
Yeah, it's
clearly
much bigger stakes for Netanyahu. He's heading into further war and conflict and violence. And it's going to take a meaningful change in American policy for that to actually change for them.
In fact, I think an argument can be made pretty compellingly that the instances where Biden has expressed displeasure about this or that, or leaked displeasure about this or that, and Bibi has gone ahead and bucked him and done what he wanted to do, have actually bolstered him politically. That has actually improved his approval ratings within the state of Israel.
And it's incredibly humiliating for the American president, that just for that dynamic between us and a client state, that they constantly tell us to shut the hell up. They don't want our advice on what to do. They just want us to keep paying for the weapons and sending them over. That's a stupid dynamic. It's fine if you want to say that Israel is an independent country and they can make their own decisions, fine. But certainly American taxpayers should not be funding their crimes. That's the problem here, is that we have a dynamic in which we constantly insist that Israel's an independent country, they make their own decisions, all we can do is advise them. Meanwhile, American taxpayers are picking up that tab. And instead of taking care of Americans at home you were just talking about in the previous segment about the fact that we're the only developed country that doesn't have healthcare.
Right.
All that stuff is set to aside. And in Israel, everybody has public health care. And that's the country that we're sending extra weapons and money to make sure that they can commit atrocities with impunity. That's an extremely stupid and broken dynamic that Americans ought to object to if they were more familiar with actually how it works.
That is such a great point.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.